We hear it all the time, that a humanities degree is, well, kind of impractical. The digging into old books has no real place in our fast-paced, modern world. But what if I told you that wrestling with a century-long literary fight over life and death could actually build some of the most critical skills you could have today?
I mean, universities make these huge promises, right? You see it on their websites. Take the University of Exeter. They say their humanities degrees will hone practical and professional skills. It's a bold claim. But how exactly?
And that really gets to the heart of it, doesn't it? How does analyzing some 19th century novel actually translate into a skill you can use? It feels like a bit of a stretch. Well, the answer is way more dramatic than you might think.
It all starts right here, with the guillotine. Seriously, to get the real power of literature, we have to jump back to post-revolutionary France, into this ferocious debate over whether the state has the right to kill. And this wasn't a fight just for politicians. It was a battle waged by the country's greatest writers.
So this is the core of what we're digging into. The guillotine's literary debate. We're going to see how three absolute giants of literature, Victor Hugo, Charles Baudelaire, and Albert Camus, use their words, their stories, to take on state-sanctioned violence head-on.
Okay, so let's set the scene real quick. The guillotine shows up in 1792, and it's sold as this modern, even humane way to die. But then the Reign of Terror happens, and it instantly becomes this symbol of absolute horror. And for the next 200 years, it just casts this long, dark shadow over French society. Something writers just could not look away from, right up until the death penalty was finally abolished in 1981. And at the very heart of this huge debate, you've got two figures who are just polar opposites. In one corner, there's Victor Hugo, the passionate abolitionist. For him, the death penalty was nothing but pure barbarism. And in the other corner, you have the poet Charles Baudelaire, who makes the shocking, provocative argument that actually it was a sacred and necessary kind of justice.
So, let's start with Hugo's abolitionist plea. See, his goal wasn't just to argue a point. His whole strategy was to use the power of a story to make society feel the real horror of it all. And he did not mince words. In an 1848 speech, he just came right out and said it. The death penalty is the special and eternal sign of barbarity. For Hugo, there was no gray area here. It was a stain on any civilized nation, period.
So how did he do it? Well, in his novel, he uses this absolutely brilliant literary strategy. He writes the whole thing in the first person, so you, the reader, are literally inside the head of a man about to be executed. He completely ignores the man's crime, we never even learn what it is, and instead focuses only on the psychological and physical torment of waiting to die. The result? He basically imposes empathy on you, forcing you to stop being a distant observer and become a close, uncomfortable witness.
Okay, now let's pivot to Baudelaire, because he offers this shocking and way more complex counter-argument. If Hugo wanted you to feel empathy for the victim, Baudelaire, well, he wanted you to question your own relationship with violence itself.
And his position was just startling. He said that lethal justice was sacred and venerable, and that it actually aims to spiritually save both society and the person being executed. I mean, this is a total 180 from Hugo's view. Baudelaire isn't talking about barbarity, he's talking about salvation.
To really get what he's doing, we have to understand this idea of Baudelairean irony. It's not just being sarcastic, it's this deep form of self-awareness where you see yourself in opposite sides at the same time. You identify with both the victim and the executioner. Baudelaire's whole point was to expose our own messy, complicated role in the very violence we say we hate.
You can really feel this in his poetry. In one poem, he writes these gut-punch lines. He's not picking a side, he's claiming to be every part of the violent act. He forces us to ask this really uncomfortable question, aren't we all, in some small way, both the victim and the executioner? It's a powerful, unsettling idea.
So, where does that leave us? This is where our third writer, Albert Camus, comes into the picture. A century later, he kind of inherits this whole debate and completely reframes it for the modern 20th century world.
Now, Camus actually sided with Hugo on getting rid of the death penalty, but his reasons were totally different. For him, a state-sanctioned killing was just another murder. It didn't solve anything. In his words, it just adds a new stain to the first one. This was a completely secular, ethical argument.
And you have to remember, his thinking was forged in the fire of a 20th century.
After 2 world wars, after seeing the horrors of totalitarianism, Camus basically argued that we live in a world without God, without some divine justice system, so the responsibility for killing another human being, even when it's legal, falls 100% on us. We can't pass the buck to some higher power anymore.
Okay, so let's bring this all the way back to our original question. We've just walked through a passionate plea for empathy, a complex dive into irony, and a modern ethical argument. What does digging into all of this actually give us in terms of 21st century skills?
Well, it gives us the power of critical reading. And that's not just a buzzword. By wrestling with writers like these, we develop what's called ethical lucidity. It's the ability to see moral problems with real clarity. We learn how to question and contest historical violence, not just accept it as a fact. Baudelaire makes us see our own complicity in the systems around us. And maybe most importantly, this whole process can move us from being just passive spectators to becoming active agents in the world.
And that, right there, is the real value. Studying literature isn't about memorizing plots or finding easy answers. It's about training your brain. It gives you the tools to unpack incredibly complex arguments, to understand hidden motivations, and to start asking much, much better questions about the world you're living in right now.
Which leaves us with one final thought. Hugo, Baudelaire, and Camus, they were reading what they called the capital letters of their time, the huge, defining issues written into the fabric of their society. So the real question for us is, what are the capital letters being written in our world today? And how can we use these tools to learn how to read them?